But welcome, so good to have you all here. We're going to start as we normally do with just an opening, kind of an invitation to be present to each other and ourselves in this moment. And so as a way of doing that, we're going to start with a song. And some of you might be familiar with this because this is one of my favorites, but I just feel like it's a really great way for us to pay attention to who's showing up in these moments. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here. And here we go.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds to change a life from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Yay. Thanks.
Ooh, I'm wanting to play that one again. That's high. All right. Well, so let me stop sharing that. So welcome. This is the first of the 3 teach-in sessions. Thank you all for being here. I think what you're going to find is the next 3 weeks, we're going to have a lot of fun together. We're going to learn about what becoming beloved community is, what it is inviting us into. We're going to build connections and relationships with one another. We're going to be able to really explore what each of us are feeling called to kind of how we are being called to kind of step into this vision, into the commitment, into what it means to follow Jesus. Tonight we are gathered to focus on history. And so the purpose, kind of our intention tonight, is to give us an opportunity to look at what is becoming beloved community. Where did it come from? what is the vision and what are the different aspects of it. We want to also give us an opportunity to kind of hear how we have here in our diocese lived into that commitment and what is it looking like for us. And then finally giving us an opportunity to just connect and have some conversation again around like just where are we feeling called personally and as a church. And so that's the intention for tonight. And we know that every moment that we are together is a moment that Holy Spirit and God is here, and just recognizing that where two or more are gathered. And so I think let's just take a look at, as I say that, all the beautiful faces on these screens. And I say screens because there's two of us, two screens now, who have said yes and shown up to this particular moment, this particular opportunity for us to really continue to become beloved community together. So let's just take a minute and actually look at our faces. If you have not put your name and your location in the chat, another invitation to do that. We're not going to take time now to do personal invitations, but we will have opportunity to do that in a little bit. So if you are joining late, I also just want to call your attention to the fact that we are recording this. Several people are going to be joining at different times in the teach-ins, but not always available to be here for each one. So we wanted to be able to make this more broadly available. Let me introduce myself for those of you that I do not know. My name is Amy Howton, and I'm serving now as the Becoming Beloved Community Coordinator for our diocese. I've been in this role a little over 2 years, full-time since January. And it's been really an honor to work alongside many of you to help build this movement, what we understand to be this Jesus movement in our diocese. I mean, I'm going to be serving as host, kind of in moderator over the next 3 sessions, but in the spirit of the way we do things in this movement, we really have invited multiple people in to be part of this teaching. And so you're not going to hear me do all the teaching. We're going to have other folks join. And so tonight we've got Meribah Mansfield and Debbie Stokes-Wayne, who are going to be sharing a lot around how becoming beloved community has really been manifested in our diocese. And so really happy to have Meribah and Debbie as our, in a lot of ways, the shoulders on whom we stand when it comes to this movement in our diocese. And many of you who are in this call have been in this work in our diocese in the multiple different formations that it's taken. So just honoring all of you who are on this call who've been part of the work, and many who are not on the call who also have been part of this work as well. So kind of the flow for tonight is, again, I'm just going to kind of start off and give us some history and some overview, and then turn it over to the warriors, Meribah and Debbie. So for now, what we wanted to do was, no one else does it quite like Bishop Curry. I mean, am I right? So we're going to start with Bishop Curry, just to bring us into what this means and where it really came from. So I've got about a 6-minute video that we're going to watch with Bishop Curry. So I'm going to share my screen here again, and we'll watch this together. Oh no, that's not what I want to do.
This is tortured holy ground. People, human beings, were tortured here, were held in bondage here, and were carted off from here like they were cattle. They wept. They slept in their own excrement. The beautiful sound of the ocean was a sound of terror. They had never seen it or heard it before. And they were going somewhere they didn't even know. I was really thinking of it as a kind of homecoming for me as an African American, knowing that we were going to be coming to the places of slaves, enslavement, and embarkation, and that terrible journey through the Middle Passage to the Americas. Knowing that was a way of returning sort of to the roots of who I am. W.B. Du Bois, in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, once spoke of being black in America as two warring souls in one dogged body. And the truth is, I've lived a life of two souls in one body, African and American, black and Episcopalian. And I've lived with that reality since I was a child. All you have to do is go into your family history and you will see paradoxes galore in all of our families. And the same is true for me, even as an African American man, as the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, a church that did participate and very often blessed some of the horrors that happened here. It was a hell on earth. We were in a chapel above the dungeon where people were being tortured. And at one point, it was an Anglican chapel. Prayers from the 1662 prayer book were prayed while people were being damned below. That is a horrible paradox to have to live. And yet, on the other hand, those who survived lived long enough for children to be born from them and for generations to come from them. And what they endured, they did not endure in vain. And so somehow standing here in this place is somewhere between heaven and hell. And for me, it is a place of real recommitment. My hope is that this journey will help us to reclaim and reface a common history that we have, a painful past, not for the sake of guilt, but for the sake of all of us, black, white, red, yellow, and brown, finding ways to face our past and then to turn in a new direction and create a new future. This may be a moment when the churches may lead the societies to find another way. The church blessed this once, but we must never bless any of the mutated, cancerous forms of hatred ever again. We must bless the world by a love that is meant for all and a love that will never be stopped. We follow Jesus, who had to endure the paradox of hatred in the midst of love, and he did it. We can do it. As the Episcopal Church, we can do it as Americans. That's the message for me from here.
Now that I love you, there's no turning back. Now that I love you, there's no turning back.
So before we go on, maybe just invite a couple of comments. I'm just curious how that landed for folks, that video, so powerful. Just want to hear some other voices. So share what strikes you from that.
Do you think the Diocese of Southern Ohio would be putting together a trip to that place?
It's a possibility. I don't know. Nothing is in the works now, but to Ghana, there's a lot of energy around making pilgrimages. And I think interestingly, what's come up a lot is like, how can we start to really understand even the history of our own land? And so really kind of looking locally to understand how injustice, how these stories have shaped our own place. So, but I think that's, yeah, good question, Ed. What else? Anything else? Just maybe one other person?
I think what breaks my heart whenever I see videos like this is just remembering how complicit our own church is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just I have to lament, as a Caucasian person, I have to lament my race. I have to lament my relatives and the injustice or potential, I don't know, but potential past relatives and the injustice they partook in. And then I also have to lament that my church did as well. That's hard.
Yeah. There's a lot of lament and a lot of forgiveness and compassion, when we talk about this work. And so, yeah, thanks for lifting that up, just understanding the role that we all play in it. And I think that's one of the things that's really beautiful about what Becoming Beloved Community invites us into, is it really how to do that and what does that look like in practice. Thank you, Amy. So I'm gonna share my screen again, because I've got a PowerPoint slide, a couple of slides to share, just in terms of an introduction and an overview in terms of, as far as what is Becoming Beloved Community. So let me pull this up here. So again, for some of you all, this is going to feel very familiar. And for others, maybe it's the first time. But Becoming Beloved Community, really what it is the Episcopal Church it's a long-term commitment to racial healing, reconciliation, and justice. It's the adopted expression of the Episcopal Church's strategic imperative or long-term commitment to the following things. To three things, really. To racial healing. Yeah.
We don't have your PowerPoint up. We're still looking at the blank slide from YouTube video.
Oh, thank you. And also thanks for saying that, because when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the chat. So, let me see here. Wonder what.
Maybe stop the share and start again. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see here.
Awesome.
Well, we say awesome. Let me see if this will work.
Well, you're awesome. So it is true one way or another.
Thanks, Phyllis. Okay, let's try this. Okay, here we go. I think this will work. Tell me, because again, I can't see the chat. So does that work?
That's looking much better.
Sweet. See, we need each other in this work. That's an ongoing lesson, y'all. So Becoming Beloved Community, it's the adopted expression of the Episcopal Church's strategic imperative or long-term commitment. So in other words, it's not a program. This is not an initiative. This is our strategic imperative and our long-term commitment, which the co-convener of our leadership team always reminds us of. And it's a threefold commitment. It includes racial healing, reconciliation, and justice, caring for God's creation and our planet, and evangelistically proclaiming the good news. So there's racial healing, creation care, and evangelism that are parts of Becoming Beloved Community. Often I think we think of, because we really have focused primarily and really put at the center of our work the first piece, which is racial healing, reconciliation, and justice, understanding, of course, that these three things are completely intertwined and interconnected. But I think it's important to speak to the commitment to creation care and evangelism as part of that commitment as well. And when we talk about evangelism, interestingly, often, I think especially as Episcopalians, we're like, what does that mean, evangelism? And so, you know what? There's some guidance here. And what that means is seeking, naming, and celebrating Jesus' loving presence in the stories of all people, and then inviting everyone to more. And so certainly that's been our approach. And I know Debbie and Meribah are going to get into that more when we talk about what this looks like in our diocese, but you all are going to see this because you showed up to these teach-ins. So we're going to be reaching out to invite you into more for sure. So this is a little bit around what it is. I think it's also important to kind of put this into some historical context. Beloved community, what this is it's a direct response to General Convention's Resolution C01. And I'm just going to go through some of this specific language. I think it's important just for all of us to know exactly what this is. This is, again, not just a bunch of us kind of coming up with this stuff on our own. But really it acknowledges the church's failure and its repeated efforts at anti-racism training, racial justice, healing, and reconciliation, commissioned by 30 previous convention resolutions since 1952. So I think let's just sit with that a minute. 30 previous convention resolutions. The Episcopal Church has been working at addressing our role, Amy, as you said, really looking at the complicity of our church's role in race and racism for a very long time. So I think for us, for me at least, what this raises, the question that it raises is, what is it going to be? How is this going to be different this time? And what is it going to take for us to really create the change that we want to see? It recognizes that despite our resolutions and our efforts, racism continues to plague our society and church at great cost to human life and dignity. It affirms the church's continuing commitment to the difficult work of racial reconciliation through prayer, teaching, engagement, and action as a top priority. It confirms our understanding that the call to pray and act for racial reconciliation and creation conservation is integral to our witnessing and living into the gospel of Jesus Christ and the demands of our faith. And it empowers the church's leadership to be responsible and accountable for leading, directing, and being fully present in carrying out this essential work. Becoming Beloved Community, it's really designed, it's kind of conceptualized as a fourfold path. And so I really love this so much. And I think this has been something that's been very helpful in our understanding of what this looks like in practice, thinking about it as a labyrinth. And so is this fourfold path laid kind of across this concept or this metaphor of a labyrinth, I think invites us to think about how these four folds are both interrelated and interconnected, and how, again, this is an ongoing process. It's not a linear kind of thing. It's something that you kind of find yourself in, continuing to kind of move in and out of in very different ways. The fourfold path includes four pieces, which is telling the truth, which is really asking questions like, who are we and what things have we done and left undone regarding racial justice and healing? Proclaiming the dream, which is around how can we publicly acknowledge things done and left undone? What does beloved community look like in this place, and what behaviors and commitments will foster reconciliation, justice, and healing? It includes practicing the way of love. How will we grow as reconcilers, healers, and justice bearers? And how will we actively grow relationship across dividing walls and seek Christ in the other, and repairing the breach. What institutions and systems are broken, and how will we participate in repair, restoration, and healing of the people, institutions, and systems? So again, kind of looking at this as these four components that are very much interrelated and invite different kinds of responses as we think about this commitment to racial healing, reconciliation, and justice. I think in preparation for tonight, one of the things that Meribah and Debbie wanted to make sure that we rooted ourselves in again was the fact that this is all very much grounded and rooted in our baptismal promises, that even the fourfold path is, again, it goes right back to what we've promised from the very beginning as followers of Jesus. And so, for example, telling the truth about our churches and race is grounded in our baptismal promise to persevere in resisting evil whenever we fall into sin, repent, and return to the Lord. Proclaiming the dream is rooted in our baptismal promise to proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ. Practicing the way of love is about seeking and serving Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves. Repairing the breach is about striving for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. Yeah, so I think part of why that's really important is that often we get the question of like, what do we do? Where do we begin? And of course, those are important questions. And we also often get the question around, well, this isn't really relevant to us. You know, we're a predominantly white church. I'm a white person. And these questions, I think, bring up a lot of different issues. But in terms of what becoming beloved community is and what it means to us as Episcopalians, it takes us just right back to our baptismal covenant. So in other words, this is relevant for all of us. If we say we follow Jesus, this is what it means. And so for me, that's one of the reasons it's really helpful that this fourfold path and really spending some time on like, what is it that becoming beloved community is and what is it asking of us? It really, in both very simple terms and also pretty complex, what does it mean to follow the life and teachings of Jesus Christ? So with that, I'm going to hand it over. I think Meribah and Debbie, we just share with us a little bit, you know, given that there was a strategic imperative that was passed in this resolution that was passed in 2017, what kind of inspired you? Like, say a little bit about how you kind of took this vision and started to breathe life into it here in our diocese.
I'm seeing that Meribah wants me to go first, and that's okay. And did you want me to go first? Sure. Do you want me to start? Okay. I was explaining, or we were talking the other evening, and with Amy, because I think one of the things that's very important is to hear, you know, how, in fact, we even ended up doing this or even having this in our diocese, even to this degree. And it's not anywhere where we want it to be at this point, but we do know that we are striving for a very, you know, good and solid foundation, and this is going to help us to move forward and get there. But I did want to say a little bit, because it was, I would say it's two different connections that we really started all of this in the diocese. We had myself, who was very much interested in the anti-racism side of this piece. And then we had Meribah, who was very much involved and interested in the creation side. And it so happened that her group had decided to do a anti-racism training over a weekend. And when I got the invitation, I was really surprised to see who was doing it, because I had never thought about it in those terms. But if I go back to the first part of Genesis in the first chapter, it should have been, you know, it should have been evident, you know, that the two are connected, the creation the anti-racism, how we treat people, what we do, it's all connected. There's not a separation there. But at any rate, the weekend happened, and I began to see what they were doing in a new light, and actually began to see another avenue, another compatriot, another partner in all of this. And, how can we partner and what can we do? And we went on, and then there was, trying to figure this out. I also, again, was deputy to General Convention when this particular resolution was made. I'll tell you, I didn't have as much hope in our leadership as other people may have. I didn't think that anything would happen with the resolution. I just thought, well, it's there and we won't do anything and we'll be back in 3 years still struggling. But they did. They took it and decided, we really want to make something. We want to create something. And that's when the beloved community came out. And more importantly, for me, was the fact that they were really utilizing our baptismal vows to do all this work. And that's been a struggle of mine, that we say those vows, 2 or 3 times in the year, maybe even more, but we don't do anything with them. We just say them. Yes, I will, and then there we are. And we're still going out and doing the same thing. So how do we move this from point A to point B? How do we take what it is that we say and we're committed to and live it? So the beloved community, as they envisioned it, as they wrote it, gave you that opportunity to do that. And so I was very excited about it and thought, wow, this is going to be great. And how do we start it in this diocese? And I'm going to let Meribah continue. Where is she?
Okay, Sister Debbie.
Debbie, will you just say a bit before we pass it over to Meribah, a bit about your role and what you've done for our diocese for the past, 100 years?
It's been a long journey. I will have to say that. Actually, Miriam was reminding me of that journey today when she was talking about her father and John Harris and the things that we had done, because I was right there with them and doing at the time that all this was happening. So it's been a very long journey. I can say that the diocese has really been in a leadership position around racial issues and anti-racism and all of that, because they did it when it wasn't even thought about so much in the wider church. So we were pretty much a leader in all of this and in what we were doing. So we have had, various racism programs, training, and all of that all across the years. And we have come to the point where we now offer training, which is the foundation for everything else that we do in this diocese. And we've been doing it for a while. In conjunction with that, I have been a deputy to General Convention, for quite a while, and have been in the struggles that we've had along those lines, and the complicity of the church, and how we acknowledge that complicity, but more importantly, what do we do about it? We can sit and have a pity party and wish that it didn't or whatever, but we need to use the past, we need to use the history so that we don't repeat it. And that we are really working hard and intentional about how we focus and what we do and how we create what we know God's vision is for his kingdom, the love and the kindness and the generosity and all that entails. Does that enough for now?
Enough for now. Yeah. I want to also just share, let me share this really quickly, because I think one of the things you're speaking to is the history of what the church has done. And Meribah, I wonder too if this might help you a little bit as you start. One of the things that we've done in our work here in the diocese is we've really looked at the history of what the Episcopal Church, the response. And so I just want to, and I'll include this link in the chat too for those of you that are interested. But I just want to take a quick visual look of this to give you a sense of the extensive historical response of the Episcopal Church to race and racism. Starting, I mean, obviously we said that, there's 30 something, let me see it down here. What exactly is it? I want to be very careful about this. There's been 31 General Convention resolutions from 1994 to 2012, 14 Executive Council resolutions from 1982 to 2014. So Miriam, I saw in your chat, many people are skeptical, particularly people of color, Black people, Black lay and clergy in our church around, well, here we go. And we definitely have heard that, it's just another flavor of the month. And there's reason for that, because look, you all, at the history of all the varied responses. And I think just something to call your attention to here as well is that when we started to compile this timeline, we pulled from several official Episcopal sources in doing this, and it was really interesting what was included in those official sources. So here you'll see that in red, we actually added to those sources, pulling from data specifically from the Union of Black Episcopalians, that had not, these things in red had not been included in those official in those more formal, general kinds of documents from the Episcopal Church. And so even just look at that in terms of the role of Black, again, lay leaders and Black clergy in the work of the Episcopal Church in addressing race and racism. Often, that work is marginalized and left invisible. So I think just even acknowledging, kind of bearing witness to that. But you'll see that the history is quite extensive. And then, we added in blue down here kind of where we are in our own history as it relates to what beloved community, how this has started to take shape here. So again, I'll add this link to in the chat so you'll have it. And I think related to that as well, we'll be sending out resources following this. But Meribah, I wonder if that's a segue.
Yeah, and before Meribah starts, I think what we need to add as far as the diocese is concerned is the history that we have that's even before 2017. That goes back quite a number of years. I do have some of that, so we'll need to add that because that's an important piece. You're muted. You're muted.
I am?
No, Amy.
I am. Yeah, that timeline goes back, Debbie, to your point, back to Absalom Jones and Richard Allen to 1937. But yeah, I think it's how do we make sure, in terms of telling the truth in that history, whose history, what history? Thank you for that. All right, Meribah, Debbie, you good? We're going to pass it over to Meribah now?
We're going to pass it over to Meribah for the moment.
Okay.
And I invite you to chime in, Debbie, because we've done this together.
Yeah,
for sure. I guess where I want to start is, Amy, you said that people wonder how can they get started on this. So for me, it's been very personal, very, very personal. I've lived a very, very privileged life, and I was ordained as a deacon in June of 2012, and I served at St. Albans and at St. John's Franklinton, which is a very low-income neighborhood in Columbus, and I worked with many homeless people. I learned about poverty and injustice firsthand. So I thought, I kind of knew something about injustice. But the November 2016 presidential election just completely knocked me for a loop. I thought, since I'd been working on justice since the 1960s when I was in college, that we'd actually gotten somewhere, that we were progressing. And it was really the first time that I felt oppressed. This is really kind of embarrassing to say, but I personally felt oppressed as a woman. And that's what really sent me into, I'm not going to say depression, but really a funk, really, for quite a few weeks. Because I really felt oppressed as a woman, and I finally began to really think about what it felt like to be oppressed as a person of color in this country since 1619. It was a real wake-up call for me. I remember thinking to myself, well, I thought white supremacy was the KKK. Why are we talking about white supremacy? And I began to learn about whiteness and understand about whiteness and do a lot of reading and thinking about it. And I've been involved in a lot of social justice efforts. The group that Debbie mentioned that held the workshop that she and I went to was Ohio Interfaith Prayer and Light. So I've been involved a lot in combating climate change over the years, but also the prevention of gun violence, farm workers' rights with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, immigration reform, criminal justice reform, working with BRED on criminal justice reform or reparative justice, worked with victims of human sex trafficking because I knew several personally in Franklinton, walked with them on their journey through recovering from addiction and trying to keep them out of jail for human sex trafficking. Food insecurity, including working with Franklinton Farms, which is a urban farm in Franklinton, trying to address the lack of fresh food in Franklinton. And after the election, I really started to kind of connect all of these things that I've been working on all these years and see that racism was underlying all of them. And I was kind of like, what can we do about this? And at the same time, the director of Ohio Interfaith Prayer and Light was working on environmental racism and coming to the same place that I was. I was the chair of the board, and we were working very, very, very closely together. And then we held this workshop in April of 2017, and we brought in Jennifer Harvey and Melanie Harris, who are two professors who are also authors. Jennifer's white, Melanie's black. We had a half white and half person of color participants, and we had really, really difficult conversations. So that was my beginning. And then we had a follow-up meeting in late May at St. Philip. And this is an interfaith group. So there were rabbis there. I mean, there's all different faiths there, all different kinds of people there. But Debbie was there, and Debbie and I were sitting together. And after the workshop, she said, have you seen Becoming Beloved Community? Because that was the month that they released it. Actually, I think like maybe a week before that. And the presiding bishop and the president of the House of Deputies, Gay Jennings, did a webinar to introduce it. And she said, I think the Episcopal Church has finally gotten it right. And I was so fascinated. I raced home and I looked up Becoming Beloved Community online, and I read the whole thing. There's a long report about what the church is going to do about Becoming Beloved Community. And then there's something that we can do as individuals, something we can do as congregations. And I was off and running. I just thought this was great. So between then and the fall, Debbie and Jane Gerdson from the diocesan staff and I worked on what can we do at diocesan convention? What can we do to raise awareness about anti-racism and Becoming Beloved Community? So Debbie and Jane and Sarah Ward, who was the director of Ohio Interfaith Prayer and Light, who had hosted that workshop, held sessions at the diocesan convention in November of 2017, and 100 people came to the sessions. We were like, whoa, people are interested in this. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of weeks later, this was fate right here. This is the spirit. Debbie sent me an email and said, wow, look at this. The United Thank Offering grant theme for next year is Becoming Beloved Community. We ought to look at this. So Debbie and Three Bridges Patrick and I got together in a Panera in Gahanna on a Saturday night. And we kind of tried to practice becoming beloved community. We introduced ourselves to each other. We told each other our stories. We got to know each other. And then we said, you know, what can we do about this? And that led to eight of us getting together at Proctor on the first Saturday in January to brainstorm about what our diocese could do about racism and how to write the grant to make that happen. And long story short, that grant helped to fund Amy's position, Becoming Beloved Community Coordinator, because we looked at the history, and what we realized was it had been all volunteer effort, and we really needed a staff person. We needed a dedicated person to really coordinate our efforts to make this happen. And so we did receive that grant in July of 2018. And the bishop appointed a task force to work on Becoming Beloved Community. It first met in the beginning of August. There were about 20 of us. And we held a lot of meetings, and we got to know each other, and we listened to several of our beloved Black sisters and brothers tell us about their deep wounds, and we learned the history of the horrible oppression that our country has heaped on people of color, and we went on our personal journeys. And then after that, we began what we called learning journeys, and we've done several of those, which are really transformative experiences where we look at our own history with racism, and we look at the church's history with racism, and we really try to confront it and understand it, and understand what our role has been in it, what our church's role has been in it. In one of those, we brought back Jennifer Harvey, who was at that very first workshop that Debbie and I went to in April of 2017. We brought back Jennifer Harvey a year ago, October of 2019, to talk about repairing the breach. And we learned about reconciliation. The Episcopal Church always talks about reconciliation, and we learned that there really can't be reconciliation without reparation. And we began to learn about what is reparation? What can that look like? And really explore that. By listening to the sacred stories, especially of the Black people who are involved in this movement, but also white people, I have learned so much, and I've discovered so much about myself and about my family, you know, and some of it's hard. Some of it is, how do you be proud of your family and ashamed at the same time? And what do you do with that shame? And how do you get past it to go to action? We really have a pattern of reflection and action. And that's why right now we have circles that meet every Friday. And one week we have a Way of Love circle where we're reflecting together. And the opposite week we have a Justice circle where we're thinking together about what action we need to take to bring beloved community here on earth, as Martin Luther King Jr. Called us to do. What this has allowed me to do is to use the gifts that God has given me and that I've honed through my work experience for decades to support this movement in a volunteer way, of course. And I have written several grants to support Becoming Beloved Community, and through the grace of God, the United Thank Offering has given us $90,000 over 3 years to support this effort. If you ever want to do anything to help make this happen, support the UTO collection in your congregation. So the coordinator has been paid for by the grants, but most of the other efforts have been volunteer. And it grows and grows every day. We invite more people into this movement every day. We had one trainer for implicit bias from the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Racism and Ethnicity on implicit bias, and we did pay her. And we had a consultant, Cherie Bridges Patrick, who worked with us on the learning journeys. We paid her. All the rest has been volunteer, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So we've really tried to balance our inner work and our outer work. It's really important to do both. We've spent a lot of time learning about the 7 practices of the way of love. I happen to be better at the practice of go than the practice of rest. And others are better at rest. And I have learned from them, and they have learned from me about go. We have tried to emphasize practicing becoming beloved community as we've done our work together. That's very important to us, that we're loving each other and going slowly enough to listen to each other, to understand each other as we're doing very, very difficult work. For me, it's a ministry of connection, and I've invited many people into the work, and I encourage everyone to invite others into this movement. It's really not work, it's really a labor of love. Bishop Breidenthal is, he likes to say, there is no secular, there's only the sacred. We don't just go to church on Sunday and then we lead a secular life for 6 days and we come back to church. It's also like that with racial justice. And you can't just put it on the shelf and say, you know, I went to this workshop, I read this book, I watched this documentary, whatever. And, you know, my life is about becoming beloved community as a follower of Jesus. This is really about my baptismal vows. If you look at those baptismal vows and you're really trying to resist evil and proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ, and seek and serve Christ in all persons, seek and serve Christ in all persons, love our neighbors as ourselves, strive for justice and peace among all people, and respect the dignity of every human being, how can we do anything but look at each other and behave towards each other as beloved children of God? It's not just seeing each other, but it's treating each other as beloved children of God. So for me, it goes back to those baptismal vows and about trying to be truly Christian, telling the truth. And when I'm in a group, a church meeting, any kind of meeting, no longer letting things slide, not letting little jokes go, not glossing over them, speaking truth. And we all need to speak truth to power. We all have a diaconal voice. This transformation for me, which has only begun, I'm sure, has been about putting myself into vulnerable positions and letting the Spirit work through me. It's not easy, but it's very rewarding. And I'm extremely grateful, especially to my fellow travelers, and most especially to my Black brothers and sisters who've taught me so much and been so patient with me. So together we're followers of Christ, and I like to say we're midwifing the emerging church. Many of you have heard me say that. And we want to invite everyone in to join us in becoming beloved community. I say midwifing the emerging church because it feels like this is where the energy is and the spirit in the church, and that we truly are connecting with each other in trying to live those baptismal vows and treat each other as the children of God that we always say that we are, and that we know that everyone is, but really, really trying to live it. And that's why we say we're midwifing the emerging church.
And, you know, to add to what she is saying, we one of the visions that we had at the very beginning was, you know, how can we develop or design, for a better word, ambassadors in all of our congregations that we have within the diocese, that can not only draw others to them in relation to the issues that we have before us, but also to draw others within the communities that they live in, because it's not just about the Episcopal Church. You know, it's about all churches, it's about all people. And if we are not able to create a way in which we can begin to figure out how we all, you know, come to this together, then that's when we're going to be in the trouble. It is a way of life. It isn't just, attending or whatever, as Meribah says. It's not just coming here. It's not just, listening to somebody, and it's not just going to a workshop. It really has to be an attitude change. You have to have a new perspective in life, and a commitment that we all are children of God, and that we all are special to him. We were made in his image. We were made in his image. And every time we look at another, we ought to see the face of Jesus. And that is where the connection really begins, and the heart of it really begins. And when you talk about us from, at least from myself, from a Black perspective, it's been a hard road and a hard journey. We sit in this country and we talk about terrorism, and terrorism for us in this country is somebody from, across the way, in another country or whatever, and terrorists. But terrorists for us are right here in this country every single day. And we have no idea what's going to happen to us every day that we wake up and walk out the door of our houses. And will we come back? Or will something else, happen? Or how are we going to be accepted? Or what is going to happen with that? So each of this, and so we keep, working at it and keep going at it. And so the things that I have seen that have been very hopeful are the things that have happened after the death of George Floyd. Because what I think people, they saw it. It wasn't me just going and saying, Meribah, won't believe what's happened. It was Meribah looking at that and understanding from her own heart and her own perspective that we cannot continue in this way. If we want to actually begin to create a kingdom, but if we want to live in peace and harmony together, we just can't continue with what it is that's going on. And that's why when you see the marches and the people, it's a very different construct than it was, many years ago in the 60s. And so, you're getting everyone to say, look, we can't keep doing this. And we have to, figure out a way to move and to live this together. So it is about, opening our hearts and our minds to everything that's around us in this world, and about listening, really listening, and then, responding. And as Meribah has said, truth telling, and the truth, to power. So, we have always said that there's always something that we can do, and, just figuring it out. And I think that the way that the beloved community was designed, it gives us that way of being able to go out and do, and not sit back and say, I don't know what to do, or, there's, it just doesn't work. There are many ways that we can help to create the world that we know that we want it to be.
You have some dialogue for us, Amy?
Yeah.
What do you want us to do, Amy?
Yeah, so why don't we let's just open it for some questions. I feel like I'm sure that people have some follow-up questions after hearing both of you share a little bit. So I will offer up as kind of a structure here. And again, this will be familiar for some, maybe not for others, but I think as we kind of engage in about 20 minutes of question and answer, if you have a question, just kind of raise your hand and offer. I think we'll just I'll try to watch too as well, but yeah. And then when you're finished with that, or maybe it's not a question, maybe it's more of a comment. And if it's more of a comment, just let us know when you're finished so that we're not talking over one another. maybe for those of you that have been kind of involved. So there's a leadership team that, and I wonder, Debbie and Meribah, if you all want to speak to that a little bit, just in terms of the current structure. But there is a leadership team, for example, that's been organized, appointed, and blessed by the bishop. But I wonder, for example, some of you are on the call who are serving on that leadership team. Anything to add? Would you add anything to what Meribah and Debbie have shared?
Amy, I'm not on the leadership team, but if I've been I've been in many of these spaces where people are talking and sharing, and it's been really wonderful. And I've also been hearing a lot of kind of people wanting to move beyond talk to action, and I'm a little, there are all sorts of actions that can take place. Obviously, protesting. But often when I'm out in the streets protesting, part of me is hoping that there is like some really, powerful group that is using my protest as leverage when they're going to go meet with the city council or the mayor or, et cetera, so I'm relying on like these leaders to be there to make my kind of what sometimes feels like pointless shouting count for something. And I'm also like really concerned about housing. Like we have a huge increase in homelessness and a growing rate of eviction, and much of it is truly racialized. Like it is not white people who are being evicted at the rates that people of color are. So I'm just curious, like, is there a point where as we grow and we learn together, we begin to kind of articulate very specific actions that we as a diocese are going to take?
Can I take that one, Amy and Debbie? Well, action's my favorite thing, Carl. So, that is why we have formed this justice circle, because we are alternating between reflection and action. And within the justice circle, and anyone is welcome to join the justice circle. We have identified issues that people want to work on. So it's not a top-down model, it's a grassroots model. What are people concerned about and what do they want to work on? Housing is one of those issues that there's a group of people working on in the diocese. Melanie Slane, right, Amy, from Cincinnati is working on housing in that area. But there are several issues that we're working on. And something that's really important and that we want to figure out how to do is to get everyone involved in advocacy, because in order to change policy and change law, that's how you're really going to do reform. For people to learn how to speak truth to power and how to use their voice to really bring about change, action on these social justice issues. So in the 4 Tuesdays in October, the Episcopal Church through Province 5 is offering a series of sessions on the basics of faith-based public advocacy. And Amy can send that information out to you after this. But we really need to get people involved so that they're calling their city council people, their state representatives and senators, their US representatives and senators, that they're working through organizations like BREAD, that they're working on issues locally, and especially that we come together as a justice network so that we can do rapid response. What the state legislature is doing now, because there's a majority there who can do this, is that they give very, very short notice for hearings on bills or even votes in the Senate on the issues that have the most conflict of them, like gun violence, like a stand your ground law or things like that. They'll announce on a Friday night that they're going to have a hearing on Tuesday, and then they're going to pass it on to the state legislature. So we need a rapid response network throughout the diocese. We need to engage the members of congregations and help them to understand that this action is important in order to build the beloved community. So that's my dream, is that we'll get there get there somehow. But it's going to take, you know, a lot of education for, you know, for people to understand how to use their voice, and the fact that they do have power in their voice, and that we do need to speak up in order to take action and make change. And I think one problem about the Justice Circle is it meets on Friday mornings, and we need to address that. We need to figure out a way to make it open so that everyone can come into the work. But we just started it in May, so we're getting there. It's not the history of this diocese to really be oriented this way, but this Becoming Beloved Community movement is working on that. Amy or Debbie, you want to add anything?
I see Todd raising his hand.
All right, go Todd.
Well, I just wanted to add that in the Justice Circle and the various different subgroups, what we're trying to get the groups to work with is called the scaffolding. And the key element, Carl, to your point is, who else is doing this work? There are other bigger secular and non-secular organizations already on environmental justice, on racial injustice and stuff. So the point is, we can add our voice more efficiently to somebody that's already got the connections to congressmen or city council, or just a bigger movement that's making ads or whatever it might be, more protests. But the point is, that's one of the fundamental pieces of the Justice Circle, and the action part is, who can we team with that's already ahead of us? We don't need to reinvent everything.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Carl.
Yeah. What else, you all? What else strikes you? Maybe just even around like Becoming Beloved Community, if you're just learning more about what it is and what it involves and its relationship back to our baptismal vows, just opening up some conversation here for us.
I'd like to ask a question. Back to the whole topic of 30 plus resolutions since 1952, and all of which have not gone anywhere. Why do we think this particular resolution and the action behind that resolution is going to be any different? Why do we think we're going to be successful? Why do we think we're going to make a dent in this and start moving things forward? And this is particularly an important question for our people of color who are part of the church and are saying, yeah, okay, I've heard this before.
You take that, Debbie. You're muted.
Yep, you're muted.
I know. Oh, you just did that purposefully, didn't you? You know, that question is often, and it's often asked by all of us, you know, as we keep getting in, why do you stay in this? You know, why do you do this? And I, you know, and I do get down. I do get, you know, depressed, disgusted, frustrated, angry, saddened, disappointed. But then there's this one little kernel, one little thing that would happen. And I'd say, oh, you know, I think this might work. You know, we may have a way of doing it. And then I just stick in it for just a little while longer. And I will tell you, my Black brothers and sisters are not like this. I mean, in most ways, because we've been so disappointed in so many ways. And I think that we also need to be very intentional and very focused on it. And we cannot, it is not ours to change. I've always said this, and I say it in the trainings. It is not up to me to make this a difference. It is left up to my white brothers and sisters to begin to make this difference. You can't you're not going to change the world or change what's happening on my back. It's just not going to happen. That has been tried over and over again, and it's the excuse of, I've given you this and I've given you that, and look what you did, and then we're right back where we started. We either have to be about the courage and the guts of really doing this, or we've just got to say, it's just not mine, and I'm not, and I'm going to be honest about it, and I'm not going to do it. It can't be on me anymore. And I'm very point blank, about that. Now, am I going to be in the fray? Yes. Am I going to help and support? Sure I am. But you got to be the lead. You got to take the lead, and you've got to figure out, how are you going to have this kind of discussion with your families and your friends and your colleagues around what is not right and needs to be changed. Now, do I see the beloved community has been received differently in the Episcopal Church, at least from my way of looking at it. And when I say received differently, it has given us a way of beginning to address what has been very, very difficult. And in addition to that, they have really been sending out and helping in terms of tools. Because they've had the sacred ground, we've had the traces of the trade, we've had those kinds of things coming from them. And we've had our wider church, and particularly our cathedral in Washington, D.C., who has had myriads of Zoom meetings in that all the time, on issues, of race, on issues of what's happening with the police and the police departments, and how do we go about, getting that changed, and what is it that we need to do, and where do we need to go. The other part of this is, though, if we aren't able to get to, if we're not able to do it, like you have said, Meribah, on the ground, from ground up, then we're not going to get anywhere. They can provide the tools, but we don't use them, then it's not going to work. I think we're in a good start with the beloved community, but we have so much more to do. And I think part of it is that we take off, we do a big chunk, it's like we're doing the whole diocese. And I think we need to start small and build up, with that, and be successful, or fail in what we're doing and have some learning on what it is that we need to do to go forward. We need commitment from everyone. It isn't, just the few that you see here, and it always ends up to be the same few that you see. We need everyone to do this. So it's our responsibility to go back to wherever we are to say, look, we have to do this, and we need to do it. And how can we get started? And, begin looking at people who, it could be one or two, in your congregation that's interested, and start with those one or two, and then move it and keep, branching out. But gosh, it's on my own, it's just, hearing something, or someone has just done something, or this has happened, and then I get excited again, and I think, oh yeah, well, we're going to get somewhere. Doesn't last long, but it lasts for a minute.
I would add one more thing, Debbie, to answer Larry's question. That is Presiding Bishop Curry. I mean,
true.
Resolution C-019 was passed in July of 2015 in the same General Convention where he was elected presiding bishop.
Mm-hmm.
So he took that, and he and his staff and Gay Jennings really devoted themselves to really doing this well, and putting out those tools and resources that Debbie mentioned. And he brings home this message over and over and over and over in his sermons, in his videos, in his writings, and just, you know, he really walks the talk, and it's seeping into the culture of our church.
But what scares me with that, Meribah, is that his term is almost up.
I know.
And, you know, if we begin to be reliant upon, you know, one, you know, to really carry that ball, you know, and do that, then that's when we begin to get into difficulty. And I like to see us use him, and then, you know, and then branch out on branch out for ourselves. Because, you know, if we keep relying on that, then we're going to be right back where we started.
You know,
I see that Jimmy has her hand up here first.
So Larry has something to add too.
Yeah, Mary and Jimmy. Yeah, Jimmy, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just.
But what I'm thinking that we're missing is you do not get people to change unless they think they're going to get something out of it. And what we're doing is approaching, you have to look at your baptismal vows. Well, what are you going to gain if you live a life like that? I think we need to be talking about that a lot more. For example, they say if we would pay everyone a living wage, everyone, including the wealthy, would live better. Everyone would live better. That's something to talk about. I think we have to put a carrot out there. People have to get something, because we're too good at our dualistic thinking, where we just look at what we want to look at, our television. So what we need to be thinking about, what carrots can we angle out there?
What I have found personally is increased, it's, you know, very, very much improved my spirituality and brought an entire new dimension to my spirituality. It's hard to.
But what about a person who's not even a Christian? We want to reach them too. There are a lot more of them out there than there are us. So we do need to be thinking. I'm not a great lover of PR stuff because they make you think the way they want you to think. But there's a lot to be gained by everyone to live as a Christian. A lot to be gained. But how can we
so if I could
verbalize that? Yeah. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Go ahead, Miriam.
Well, yeah, actually, that's the perfect thing right before what I wanted to say, which was actually responding to what Larry said. What his original question was, what is different about this than all of those past pieces? I grew up with my dad being a priest and very involved in this work, as Debbie said, and so I've heard a lot, you know, from when I was young and you know, till now. And I think the difference is the fact that this is rooted in scripture and rooted in our baptismal covenant. And one of the fourfold paths is the way of love, which is the 7 practices that make us better disciples. So frankly, I think that Episcopalians don't always make the best Christians in deed. We have our actions down and we have our words down, but we don't always do our it's kind of the implicit bias concept. Our actions don't always match up with our intentions. And so I think we have an opportunity here to put racial justice in the context of our Christianity, in the context of our spirituality, and in the context of the commitment that was made on our behalf, that we make on other people's behalf at their baptism, that we are going to live the life that Amy detailed earlier in this session. So I think having it rooted in scripture, having it rooted in our common story, our shared story, and our shared practices, that gives us an understanding that we can commit to on an individual level, which then leads us to the group level, which then spills over into our relationships with other people. I can't, if I'm not equipped to evangelize, not even getting into the racial issues, then I can't feel comfortable about trying to get other people to change their behaviors if I'm not going to be willing to step up and change mine. So I feel like I can better show through example of how I'm living and what I'm doing that I can comfortably talk about And that, I feel like, is how we get people to change who may not necessarily be Episcopalian, let alone Christian, let alone, practicing any type of faith. But those spiritual practices give us a common language. And then we can attach those to, if I'm going to see God in Amy, then I need to have the understanding that that makes us equal in the eyes of God, and that I prioritize that. And that, to me, is the difference in how we can and invite, white people, because I 100% agree with what Debbie said. White people, we need you to do this work. This is not my work. It's my call to walk with you as you do this work. And it's my call to serve as an example and as a witness to why it's so critical, because I can't put it on a shelf ever. I don't have the luxury of ever not thinking about being Black and what that means in this country. So, and I have 3 daughters who I care very much about having high quality lives. And that's why I do this work. So I think all of us who are here are feeling God tugging on us somehow to enter into it. And that is really all you need, is to continue to listen to that call and listen to that tug on your heart.
If I could circle back on this question, I'm very glad that it has generated the kind of conversation that we're having, because I think it's important for us to really ferret out the answers to that question. It's important for us to go back and look at those resolutions and really identify those things, those specific things that make this more of a probability versus an impossibility. I don't know what's in the other resolutions, but I'm very interested in it, because coming at this, I've been in this kind of work on the secular side for a very, very long time. And I was able to convince myself that this was something that I should get involved with, because it was different versus the environments I was doing this work in on the corporate side, in corporate America. I recognize that it was an acknowledgement from the church that this is a racist system. It was an acknowledgement that it was an ownership that was acknowledged by the church, that they were part of the formation of this system. Those two things are very different than the world I come from. It's being led by predominantly a white leadership and infrastructure. That's different. There's an actual organizational body or an infrastructure that's in place. You can argue whether it's enough or too much, but there's an infrastructure in place to push this thing forward. That's different. And then there's a plan, and then there's the leadership that you mentioned with the bishop, and hey, our bishop in the Southern Ohio Diocese, for that matter, who's going to be leaving as well. We've got to deal with that issue. But all of those things made it different for me. I'm not sure that this effort is any different from the other efforts, and that would be a good thing for us to be able to confirm for people, because then okay, this is different. I'll get involved.
I think, yeah, thank you for lifting up that question. And in some ways that challenge, Larry, in terms of like, again, what for one, like what is going to make this different? And then truly, like just in terms of practically, what is different about this? And Michelle is raising the question around funding. You're saying that to some degree, there's also some infrastructure there. There's a plan there. And I think that this is actually a really good place for us to bring this to a close tonight. In some ways, again, like just the questions, there's not, I think I will say we can, in some ways this has been spoken to in a variety of different ways tonight. We can look to the church, we can look to institutions, we can look to these systems to give us these answers. But at the end of the day, this is on each of us individually to choose. And I think Peter Block always says, the answer to how is yes. And so our piece is we have to individually, personally choose every moment, every day to walk in faith as Christ has taught us to do. And so I think that it feels like this is a good place for us to end. We're going to gather again next week to hear stories from some of you who are on the call, others who are not, to share how they have lived into this, both personally and how they've invited their congregations into this work as well. And, I think part of what we continue to come back to in the work of becoming beloved community is, in some ways, there's always a sense of unfinished business. So we're not going to solve these questions. We're not going to solve these problems in these sessions, or probably even in our lifetime. But it is truly being together in the questions that is a gift. So with that, I want to offer up a way for us to close. And we're going to Miriam spoke to the importance of the way of love. And we do gather we gather every Friday. So everyone is invited to join us tomorrow, Friday mornings, 10 o'clock, from 10 to 11:30. Those weeks rotate in focus between the way of love and justice making. Tomorrow we will gather as justice making. But we often end with this covenant. We're going to end with it tonight, just to, I think, bring us again into this commitment that we are all making together. So I'm going to share my screen here for the last time. I'm sure y'all are sick of me saying this, but so this is the Way of Love covenant. And I'm going to ask for somebody to volunteer to be a leader, and ask for the rest of us to take off our mutes, and we will chime in as the people here. So who's going to volunteer to be our leader and read this with us? All right, well, I'm going to be the leader.
Can you make it bigger, Amy?
Make it bigger? Yep. Thank you. Is that good?
Great.
All right, sweet. Here we go. Jesus' way is the way of love. In him we find more love, freedom, and abundant life. You are invited to turn toward Jesus and to commit to follow his way of love in the context of Christian community, trusting in his power to change each of our lives and to change this world. After each bidding, all who desire to make this commitment should join in proclaiming, by the Spirit's power, we will. Will you turn and center your life on Jesus, falling in love with our Lord again and again and again?
By the Spirit's power, we will.
Will you ground your life in the life and teachings of Jesus as revealed in Scripture? And will you pray and simply listen for God's voice in your life and in the world?
By the Spirit's power, we will.
We will.
Will you gather together in worship, to break bread, and to thank and praise God? And will you bless this world with your story, your resources, and your labor?
By the Spirit's power, we will.
Will you cross boundaries and fearlessly become God's beloved community? And will you take rest, receiving God's gift of grace and restoration, and letting God be God?
By the Spirit's power, we will.
May the God who formed all things in love draw you near to God's own heart, empower you by the power of the Spirit to live the way of love with fellow travelers, and send you to participate in the resurrection and healing of God's world. And may the blessing of our Lord, loving, liberating, and life-giving, be with us and remain with us forever and ever.
Amen.
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 Thank you, Amy.
Thank you all. Thank you. We will see you next week, same time, same place, and I'll follow up with a capture of tonight's conversation.
Thank you. Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, Debbie.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.